Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. Today we have a conversation with the new St. Louis Police Chief, John Hayden. He was appointed 3 months ago at the end of an extraordinarily violent year in St. Louis, and this one's off to a violent start. Chief Hayden joins me in studio. Chief, it's a tough way to start a new job, isn't it, with all the bloodshed in the city?
It is, Don. It's very tough, but I think we're doing some things that'll help stem the tide of violent crime.
Such as?
We're putting a lot of emphasis on this rectangle that I've come up with. That rectangle is between Goodfellow and Vanderveer when you run east and west, and then it goes from Dr. King to West Florissant. And so crime, where we're focusing at, crime is down. We're placing supplemental resources there. We haven't drained the districts of manpower, but we've put supplemental resources inside that rectangle. And inside of it, we're looking at about a 13% deficit in violent crime this year so far. So that part I'm pleased with. We are ahead in homicides. We're up about 6. It's 40 total. We're up about 6. But the thing that I like to point out is that out of that 40, 21 of them have been drug-related. And when I say drug-related, I mean that either there are drugs on the scene that would indicate it's drug-related, or after talking to witnesses, we realize that it's drug-related. So 21 of them are drug-related. 5 of them are domestic, and 4 of them are about personal vendettas. And so that's 30 out of the 40 are things that we have to look toward trying to intervene in some of these risky behaviors.
How do you intervene?
Well, first of all, you work. For example, if you look at drugs, I mean, hey, if some of the driving force around drug activity or drug shootings is about people looking for jobs, I mean, I would hate. Day number 1, we had a double homicide on the 5900 block of Kennerly. Mm-hmm. They were relatively young men. It had some of the makings of a drug transaction. All I would tell you is that I would hope that I could do something to steer. If the decision on that very cold night was let's do a drug deal, mm-hmm. I would hope that I could bring resources up to that area that would make choices like that avoidable. Mm-hmm.
Well, what kind of resources? Is it just a question of visibility of uniformed officers?
Some of it is visibility, but also I think it's about choices. So what I'm going to do is, and you might have seen my mobile office, but when I take my mobile office up there, I'm going to invite organizations like Slate to go with me. I want to invite organizations such as Better Family Life. I'll invite the Urban League, and what I'll be trying to do is bring people that have alternatives. Police department mm-hmm. isn't a social. We don't do social work, mm-hmm. but we can be that spoke that brings social resources to some of those distressed areas, in hopes that it will indirectly affect violent crime by providing more opportunities, education, jobs, and things like that.
How do you get around something that has always been a problem in certain communities, and that is suspicious of the police? People tend to run away when the cops are around because they're afraid of them.
That's correct. Well, we're doing, and I think, Don, I think law enforcement across the country realizes that an over-focused on statistics really lacks the personal touch that you want. Mm-hmm. And so I'm requiring the captains of the districts to actually come up with community outreach schedules. And we're spending a lot more time in the community. We're spending a lot more time at schools. We're spending a lot more time out of the police car. And I'm hoping to bridge that gap. In fact, I was at Northwest High School a week ago, and I talked to some of those kids. It sits in the middle of Walnut Park East, historically a pretty violent area, mm-hmm. and a lot of the kids that were in this seminar living in and around the area, and they told me that if I built relationships with them, I would have a lot better opportunity to talk about some of the troubled areas and some of the best places to put resources in order to stem violent crime. So I had a very candid conversation with those young folks, and I will continue to do that type of thing.
Are they going to see officers that look like them? That's an important aspect.
Big challenge, Don. We are recruiting more heavily in the African American community. Mm-hmm. We've been able to expand our regular recruitment program. In other words, normally we just recruit out of the St. Louis metropolitan area. We got a donation from the Police Foundation that will allow us to expand to some of the colleges in and around Missouri to expand our reach. We also are on the radio on some of the urban radio stations in order to expand the invitation. And then we're looking at and we hopefully we'll be able to fund a cadet program that allows us to have relationships with youth that are 18 and above, and that way they can. If some of them go to the colleges around here, it will also help pay for some of the uniforms in some of the colleges. So it'll be like a scholarship. So we're looking to use that as recruitment as well.
You're still down about 10% in your number of.
We're down 130 officers, and so that's that'd be right at 10%. And so we're trying to make up that. The challenge is that as quickly as we can hire officers, we also have the attrition, and so we're really not making any headway, even when we graduated class just 2 weeks ago.
Going back to the recruiting efforts that you're making, particularly in the African American community, again, something that we've heard for years is that young black men and women are not fearful, but concerned about joining the police force because the rest of the community will think that they're traitors.
Yeah, I think that once people know what the career path is, I think that they realize that they can be a contributor to making the neighborhood safe. If that's something, it's always been a dangerous job, Don. But if you're a kind of person like I was, that says, hey, I want to make a positive difference in my community. I want to do something that has quick rewards. Hey, if you got a drug dealer or a bad set, if you will, in a neighborhood, and you go to roll call, and they talk about that at roll call and what we need to do over there. Sometimes the rewards are immediate, and you can say, "Hey, I made that neighborhood safe." Mm-hmm. There are people that can come out of their house today because I've taken that corner back, and so the rewards are instant, in spite of the fact that there's still numerous career paths that you can have. You can, a lot of people have dreamt of being a homicide detective or a narcotics detective or a SWAT detective. Those are still very popular fields, and so I think that there's something to offer both African American recruits as well as white recruits.
You're pretty dependent, aren't you, still on the neighborhood residents themselves to kind of be your eyes and ears? Absolutely,
and getting back to the point you made earlier about people being afraid of the police. Hey, we're trying to do things that bridge that gap. I've talked about my mobile office, but I used to set up a table and a chair on a heavily drug infested street. But now I got a vehicle that I can take citywide to sit on streets across the city. And those are the kind of things that when I sat out there, people came out and talked to me. They might say, "Hey, look over my right shoulder. That house is a problem." And so we were able to get information from neighbors to help us stem violent crime.
I've heard that you're actually distributing candy in some of these stops as well. Is that working, or can it work?
We talked to some. We got a lot of information from some of the social workers, and they said, "Hey, we certainly giving out candy is fine. Could you get away from giving it out curbside?" A lot of 7 or 8 year olds don't understand the difference between a police officer and a nice person, and so we heard that, and so a lot of community events. Of course, we'll have candy for the kids, but we're going to be careful about passing it out at the curbside, so we don't want confused kids about staying away from strangers.
Give me, if you would, a sense of some of the things that you've learned out on the street with your mobile van and with this neighborhood policing.
I'll tell you the biggest thing that I've learned, Don, is that people still care about their communities. They will come out. They do want relationships with the police department. And so sometimes you get a sense of things that people really don't want police around. Hey, people still want the police around. They just want to have connections with the police that they haven't had in some time. And I think departments that have been successful in getting a lot more community cooperation have realized that we gotta hey, it's one thing to talk about what's happened in the neighborhood for past 5 years. People are more interested in what's happened the last 5 days. And if you get out and talk to people, spend some time, you'll get to learn the neighborhood quite well. So a lot more old-fashioned policing that you and I grew up with, Don. Those are the kind of things that people are asking for again.
Sure. They want to see an officer that they know and respect in their neighborhood and available to them.
Absolutely.
What did you make of the weekend demonstrations by young people against gun violence?
Hey, I thought it was great. I think that the young folks are saying that they are, that they feel unsafe in their schools. That's something that, again, Don, you and I grew up with, never worried or concerned about somebody coming into school and doing some type of active shooter situation. And so, hey, it seemed like the kids just want safety. And I don't think that's too much to ask. And so I'm quite proud of many of them. And I'm for it 100%.
It was an orderly demonstration, which is always a good thing to have happen.
Absolutely.
What sort of instructions, and are they any different than might have been the case 6 months or a year ago? Any instructions to the rank and file now with regard to how to act in demonstrations? Not just the one like the one last weekend, but others after the Stockley verdict, for instance.
Sure. We are working on a response plan now that kind of incorporates lessons learned during the protests of the fall. And so I'm finishing my process of meeting with my commanders, many of whom worked many of those nights, those tension-filled nights during the fall. And when I'm done, when I'm finished speaking with my commanders, the next group that I will reach out to is the protest community, because I'm interested to know what they thought about our response. Naturally, there were some things that they would say went well. There were some things that they would say didn't go so well, and I want to talk to. So I'll be able to form our future protest response based on having talked with my commanders and officers and having talked with the protest community. I think that we're going to have a much better response that allows people to express their First Amendment rights as well as public safety for others in the neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, how is that response likely to be different? What are some of the areas specifically that would be different?
Specifically, I think that one thing that I learned, and I worked many of those nights. One thing would be is that if you have, of course, you need to have some intelligence to know about it ahead of time. But anytime you have a pretty large protest that you know that's going to be in a certain area, you certainly can try your best to keep traffic out of there. No more than you would if there were a traffic accident there that required some time to get control of. You want to divert traffic away from crowds. I think one thing would be is it helps keep people safe, but it also allows people to express their rights. And hey, it's sometimes, and hopefully you could. The key is in reaching out to them. You want to let the protest community know how much that impacts public safety in and around the area they're protesting, but at the same time, keep them safe. Hey, you don't want a Charlottesville or anything like that going on. So I've found that cars trying to drive through large groups that doesn't work either. Mm-hmm. And so the best way that I found is to kind of create a protective bubble in and around protesters.
Right. We've got to take a break. We're talking with Chief John Hayden of the St. Louis Police Department. He's been on the job for 3 months now, and he's gotten off to a fast start. Unfortunately, so has violent crime in the city, and that's a big problem. We'll continue the conversation in a moment. If you'd like to be a part of it, we'd love to hear from you. Give us a call at 382-8255. That's 382-TALK. Send us an email to talk@stlpublicradio.org, or if you'd prefer to send us a tweet, we'll take that as well, to STL on Air. Back in a moment. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Welcome back to our conversation with the new Chief of Police in the city of St. Louis, John Hayden. Let me go to the area that's very uncomfortable for police to talk about, and that is officer-involved shootings. We've had some here. We've had some everywhere, it seems. What sort of directives, if any, are out there from you with regard to use of force by officers?
Well, Don, one thing that I've put out is I've stressed to officers that if, in fact, we're going to regain the trust gap that we've lost in some of our, and not so much the St. Louis Police Department's officer-involved shootings, but nationwide, the way that we can regain that trust is to make sure that we can articulate that we follow our rules, which are very specific, and to exercise those rules as stated in our policies, and then to make sure that you can articulate what it is and why you and why you proceeded in that way. I think that's very important. I mean, it's one thing to it's very important to be able to explain what you did and why you did it, and I think that's important. And I stress that I've sent something out to our officers relative to that, to making sure that if we're ever going to regain that trust, that sacred trust, with respect to actually having to use deadly force, then we're going to have to be able to articulate what we did and why we did it.
Who should investigate such shootings?
Hey, I certainly believe that if you have competent personnel that are skilled, conscientious investigators, I see us being able to do it ourselves with a review process that allows other entities to review it. Circuit Attorney's Office, kind of how we do it now. That could be one review person. I know that the forward through Ferguson mentions that the investigator would ultimately it would be responsibility of the Missouri Attorney General, and the Missouri Highway Patrol do the investigation. That's I guess that's ideal. I don't know that the resources are there for that to happen for the Highway Patrol to investigate officer-involved shootings in the city and the county. But that being said, I think that the key is that the transparency says, hey, these are what the facts say, and that any organization should be able to review it, particularly law enforcement. And so I'm very much in favor of being able to put it together within the agency and then letting anybody review it that is entitled to see it.
The concern is obvious. That is that you're investigating yourself, and that always raises eyebrows.
Yes, absolutely. I understand that. But I mean, hey, the one way, and that is the way we've done it in the past, of course. But I think we have with our Force Investigative Unit, we have a lot more technology to help investigate officer-involved shootings, and it's just a matter of whether or not people trust us. Hey, Don, I spent 6 years in the Internal Affairs Division, and part of that was looking into and investigating officer-involved shootings. And I wouldn't be ashamed to share the things that I looked into and the decisions that I made around it. And so I think that there's such a thing as an organization doing an investigation and have it open for review for the appropriate entities.
One other question before we go to the phones, we have some folks want to get into the discussion, and that is the city's response, given the school shootings that we've had, the city's response to the active shooter. Is the strategy here in the St. Louis that if there's a shooter in a school, police go in, they don't wait around for SWAT? That's pretty much the accepted strategy nationwide. Is that you can't. In other words, the active shooting situations are so oftentimes very brief. You have to intervene as quickly as possible. Otherwise, in other words, you don't have 5 or 10 minutes to await SWAT. You have to act as soon as possible. That's what we learned at Columbine with tragic consequences, waiting for SWAT, and a lot of people got killed.
Absolutely. And in fact, interesting enough that you mentioned that, I meet with Dr. Kelvin Adams today to talk about active shooter situations.
Why today and why?
It's previously scheduled. Naturally, the most recent school shooting prompted the conversation. But I mean, we're sitting. It just happens to be today. Later on today, around 2:00, he and I will be talking.
Should teachers be armed?
Well, I think arming the teachers is a bad idea. Yeah. I think, first of all, what if my mom was a school teacher for 35 years. She'd be definitely afraid of having a gun. And so I guess you got to ask yourself, I mean, if what happens to teachers that don't want to be armed, does that affect their desire to educate children? And I've heard many teachers say, hey, where would I put a gun? And then do I make the situation more dangerous by, having it in there in the meantime around kids? Probably. It just sounds like a recipe for destruction, I think.
And if the cops come in looking for a bad guy after a shooting and they see someone with a gun and kill him, it could be a teacher.
Absolutely. I mean, right. Because you have to make a split-second decision. Somebody running down the hall with a gun could be mistaken for a bad guy.
Let's bring Cecilia into the conversation. She's calling us from the Central West End. Cecilia, thanks for waiting. You're on the air.
Yes. Hi, Chief. I want to congratulate you, first of all. And then I want to say that I really appreciate that Lyda Cruson had the strength of character to pick the best man for the job.
Thank you so much.
I do have a question for you.
Okay.
And that is, do you think that as the first African-American chief that there are many who are expecting you to be a miracle worker?
No, interestingly enough, I'm actually the fourth African American chief. I was preceded by Chief Harmon back in the early '90s, followed by Chief Henderson, and then Chief Isom preceded me. So I'm actually the fourth in about 20 years. So no, and I don't think people have greater expectations of me because I'm African American, but I certainly know that people really want somebody, and I'm hoping I'm certainly hoping and praying it's me to really get violent crime under control in St. Louis.
Sure. And one last question, and I'll be done. What do you think is the role of the corporate community in helping you to do your job?
Sure. The corporate community have been, first of all, very supportive, and Judge Edwards and I have met with the corporate community on a couple of different occasions. And what many of them are doing or willing to do is either invest in organizations that can put resources in distressed areas, or actually build or do something there themselves. If for example, many of the organizations are donating to organizations such as Better Family Life or the Urban League. They're making donations to them so that they can work more closely with us. I mentioned Better Family Life because they have gang counselors that can kind of work hand in hand with our gang intervention officers that actually try to quell some of the gang violence. Urban League, of course, can help out with Urban League and Slate can help out with providing jobs or education. And so the corporate community is investing in those organizations. And if it happens to be somebody in construction, they're considering building maybe recreation centers and buildings like that inside of some of those distressed communities.
Thank you for the call, Cecilia. We have a couple of questions here relating to finances, if you will. Jake tweets us and says, what's being done to address the findings from Controller Green's audit of the police department's abuse of overtime?
Well, we certainly have slimmed down our overtime usage. I mean, that was a big concern as I took office, and but again, we're 130 officers down, and so I mean, the only way in some instances to bridge that financial gap is, of course, allow people to work overtime. But at the same time, it has to be monitored a lot more closely, and we're doing that, and that's kind of what we're doing right now to address it.
The recent approval, I guess it was a Proposition P, more money for the police department. Is that having any impact at all on your recruiting effort?
I believe so, Don. I was very fearful that if Prop P didn't pass, that young men and women thinking about being police officers would have a choice of one agency making $12,000 more than the other one. That's a deal breaker down when you're 24 years old. $6,000, it's always been a $5,000 or $6,000 gap. So I think that the fact that Prop P passed in St. Louis is going to be very helpful in us recruiting and retaining some of our younger officers.
Let's take another call. Sheila joins us from Richmond Heights. Sheila, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your show. I just love it. I don't know what we would do in St. Louis without you. I've been doing research since about 1975 on the side effects of toxins and the body and the mind and the spirit. And I've been working recently mostly with Raymond Francis from MIT and Beyond Health and Robert Kennedy Jr. with the World Mercury Project. And I am more and more convinced that there's the link of prescription drugs for depression as well as street drugs linking to all of this inappropriate behavior. And we must have better nutrition for our children in our schools and in our adult lives and stop pushing prescription drugs on them. I had a son who tragically died because of doctors pushing prescription drugs on him.
Sheila, thank you for the call. You've given us a lot to chew on here. You want to respond to her, Chief?
I am very concerned about, and I mentioned earlier, I'm very concerned about the number of homicides that are related to drugs. Both drug abuse. I mean, whether it be prescription or non-prescription drugs, it's illegal use of drugs, the illegal sale of drugs. And I agree with her that I think that a better handle on drug addiction, drug sales, a better handle on that will obviously reduce violent crime in St. Louis because 21 of my 40 homicides are drug-related.
Mm-hmm. And the opioid thing is out of control now, but your officers are now carrying Narcan with them, aren't they?
Yes, we have one district that is fully implemented and utilizing Narcan as we speak, and the other ones are on schedule to be trained and start utilizing it very soon.
Right. We have a tweet from Dan who writes, how does Chief Hayden regain the trust of St. Louisans when the same police officers who intimidated, assaulted, and arrested citizens participating in last year's protests are still on the job? Shouldn't they face consequences for abuse of their authority?
Well, at least in one of the more major instances, that case is under federal investigation, and so I think what we need to look at is that there's a possibility that some pretty serious repercussions will come from that. But at the same time, I mentioned earlier that I was the commander of internal affairs for 6 years, and people know that if I do have a subject matter expertise, it would be dealing with officer misconduct. And so I don't plan on anything that comes before my desk. I plan on being very fair about it, but at the same time being very direct about not tolerating police misconduct, whether it be physical abuse or what have you.
I have a quote here from someone. I can't tell you exactly where it came from, but someone said that when you got the job, you should bring in a broom to sweep out the bad apples. Are there a lot of bad apples in the St. Louis Police Department? Are there any?
Yeah, the bad apples are always few in number, but the thing is that their mischief oftentimes spreads pretty rapidly or pretty significantly in a significant way. And so again, there's some issues out there that are in the process of being addressed that will come across my desk that I'll get a chance to weigh in on to weed out misconduct. But also, I think people know that my record for holding officers accountable is solid, and so I don't think that people will try as much to do things that maybe they've done in the past.
It's tough to get fellow officers, though, to talk about misdeeds on the part of their colleagues, isn't it?
Well, you know what, Don, I think that goes across professions. I mean, hey, but the challenge is, though, so much of it now is on in some kind of way recorded or some type of way viewed. And so it's kind of hard to say that if I was standing right there that I didn't see what happened if the cameras got me looking at it. And so you're right. There's oftentimes kind of hard to get officers to put personal relationships over integrity of the agency, but I think we're working on that as well.
Okay. Let's take another call. We'll bring in Bill calling from St. Louis. Bill, thank you for waiting. You're on the air.
Sure. Well, congratulations and Godspeed on your important new job. And I wanted your views on two ideas. One is public service announcements and for a violence prevention hotline like 311, for example, where people who were about to hurt themselves or others could call in and ask for help, so that we make it socially unacceptable to hurt somebody or yourself without asking for help first. And also working with the mayor's office to bring jobs and job training to the youth at risk on the street who don't think they have any options.
Yes, sir. I think both of them are good. PSAs, the 311 process, I think both of those are good things that we could utilize more. I think those are all work well insofar as trying to head off some type of violent act. And I've mentioned that we're working very closely with Judge Edwards, who is in the mayor's office. He's my direct report, and he's working with some of the same organizations, the Urban League, Better Family Life, Slate, in trying to make sure that jobs are getting to some of those places where people need them the most. And I think what we've seen is that when people are hurting or desperate, that it often does result in violent crime. And so he's working very closely with me in order to get those organizations involved in providing jobs and what have you.
Jobs and education, two of the most important things,
Absolutely.
Obviously, to cut back on crime. Another caller, Tom, is calling from the Central West End. You're on the air with Chief Hayden. Go ahead.
Yes, Chief. I wanted to inquire a couple of things. One is impact of closing down Larry Rice for the people that don't have a place to stay overnight. And the other is what's going on with sober houses, creating places where people want to get out of drugs. I've had some experience in trying to set up and did successfully for a little bit in Kansas City area, but I know it's a very, very complicated thing, addiction, and without a place that people can have a place where there's no drugs involved, it's difficult. I want to know what's going on there because that's driving crime.
Yes, sir. So the closing of
New Life
New Life,
Evangelism.
yeah, I'm sorry, New Life Evangelistic Center. I think that it has certainly created somewhat of a void for those types of services. But I understand that Biddle House is a place where a lot of homeless persons are getting good resources, and our district commander is working closely with the people at Biddle House to make sure that that's a safe environment for people to get services such as services for drug addiction, as well as some of the basic needs such as food, clothing, and shelter. And the sober houses. So we work pretty closely with. And I'm trying to think of that agency within the city, but I know Melba Moore is over it, and so we're working closely with them. Like I said, we do have Narcan. We're working more closely with divisions within the city agencies that deal with drug addiction. And again, I'm inviting them to, when I go, we realize that we can't arrest ourselves out of this problem, but when I go to do a neighborhood outreach blitz, that we ask organizations such as Melba Moore's team to come up and provide information with respect to drug addiction and other challenges.
Thank you for the call. We have an email from Bernadine. Could you please ask him if he'll be working with Captain Ron Johnson, who came to prominence during the demonstrations in Ferguson? I admired him very much. I read he now leads the new Office of Community Engagement and Outreach.
Captain Johnson and I are good friends and fraternity brothers, and so I know him very well. And we have done some work professionally already. Captain Johnson led a community outreach project at Yateman School, and many officers came there to help paint the school. You should have seen the faces on the kids when they saw how the new school looked for the school year. It was a project we did over the summer. But so I'm saying we will be working very closely with Captain Johnson. He's a good man. He's got some good ideas.
Okay, I'm going to take another call. This one from Gary, calling from West County. Gary, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi there. You mentioned something a few moments ago that it was a small matter, but I think one of significant importance. Just anecdotally, I'm a 67-year-old African American. As a child growing up in the city, we used to have bill collectors. So I go back a way. They used to come to your house and collect whatever, $2 a week or whatever the case may be. There was one gentleman, a white gentleman, who used to come to our house to collect the bill. And every time he came to our home, he gave me and my brothers and sisters a piece of candy. This goes back 60 years. I remember that gentleman fondly today, to the extent that I remember his name, Mr. Glazier. So please don't play past the small things. The idea that a police officer encouraging children, creating bonds, giving a piece of candy can be a very important element in terms of winning trust and positive relationships in the community.
Harry, thanks for the call. Candy works.
It does work. Candy works. Candy is sweet. Like I said, we are still going to have events where, of course, we'll have candy at hand, on hand. But I think that the main thing is that we're doing other things to try to build relationships with not only the children but the parents. And so I like the idea of having a hot dog picnic, or having when we having a community outreach piece, that we bring hot dogs and soda and that type of thing. Just like I said, to talk to people, give them a free lunch, and have some conversations with us.
Yeah, I have a note here indicating that some people were concerned about this because of diabetes, that would be an issue. I'm going to take one more call, then we're going to have to wrap it up. We'll bring in Corey calling from St. Louis. Corey, thank you for waiting. Go ahead.
I was calling in regards to the Central West End, right? You got the Central West End, you have police officers patrolling, and then on the North St. Louis, you have no police officers patrolling. I asked the police officer why is that. He says because the Central West End pays for that. What about North St. Louis?
The officer that told you that Central West End pays for it was telling the absolute correct truth. They have a special taxing district that allows them to deploy more officers, people that are working secondary. In other words, officers that when they're finished their tour of duty with us, or if they were off that day, they can work secondaries, what we call a secondary, an extra job working in the Central West End. That being said, though, areas that don't have those resources, of course, we still have to deploy officers appropriately. I mentioned putting more officers in the streets. Even though we're down 130 officers, we have some areas, we have some units that have officers that I'm using as supplemental officers. I can't use them when I'm down 130 officers. I have to slim those down, so there will be more officers going back out on the street very shortly. But I appreciate that call.
You got to get up to full strength, obviously, for a lot of different reasons. Going to have to end it there, Chief. Thank you so much for being with us. It's been great talking to you. Are you enjoying the job?
I am enjoying it, Don. I am enjoying it. It's like I said, it's a big undertaking, but I've been at it for 31 years, and I think I have some solutions, and I'm willing to implement them.
Okay, we'll be watching you.
Thank you, sir.
And,
Thank you
and
for
be
having
inviting
me.
you back here, and I hope you come anytime you choose.
I appreciate it. You're a very gracious host. Thank you very much.
Thank you. St. Louis Police Chief John Hayden. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.